In the quiet of the evening, where shadows softly play, a fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away, with a twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams. He waits for the Friday night glow, where the magic redeems. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. He picks up a book, the pages worn and wise, every line a whisper under the vast skies, from far off lands where the wild things roam, to enchanted forests where the heart finds home. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. With every word he reads, he casts a spell of peace, transporting all who listen to a land where joy won't cease. For in these fairy tales, amidst the laughter and tears, the wolf finds his solace, he conquers his fears. As the night grows deeper, he serenades the moon with melodies that linger, a soft and soothing tune. In this sacred hour, where magic abounds, the fairy tale wolf writes love into sound. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one.
Oh, dang, forgot to turn the cat light on. Hold on. Ouch. Anyway, now you can see the cats. At least two or three cats. I'm not sure why Twitch decides to do two sets of rolls when I manually had to do the first one, then when it's on the last minute of that one, I decided to do another 3 minutes. So if you can't hear or see me right now, blame Twitch. I'm trying to think, what was the name of the Doctor and Doctari? Although it's probably Doctari. 35 more seconds. Stinking ads. No, I guess I really shouldn't say stinking ads, since that seems to be the only revenue I get most of the time. But hey, I tell stories, not sell merchandise. Can't even sell my own book. Well, not well anyway. By the way, all three are on Amazon, and Kel will eventually post a link. Okay, now the ads really should be over. Again, I don't know why it played 2 sets of ads. Especially since it started the second set. The first one only had a minute left. And I type way too loud. But my keyboard is close to the microphone, so I guess there's that too. But anyway, nope. Guilty redeemed first, as Corey didn't. But it is Friday, and we will do fairy tales, because that's what Fridays are for. So I hope everyone gets nice and comfy. I will try not to do too many screeching voices. I haven't read ahead in the book, so I don't know what's coming up. I am going to try to get at least 4 stories done tonight. And if there's any audio issues, please let me know. I actually had someone comment on my audio on one of the YouTube clips. Salty came in for 3rd. I haven't had a 2nd yet. But welcome in, Salty, and thank you for lurking. Let's go ahead and get up to my fairy tale screen. Come on, button. I pushed the button. There's the button. There we go. But yes, we're still in the Olive Fairy book, the second to last of the color fairy books. Then I will have to find something else to do. Well, there's other books and different series, but I'll get to those eventually. I think the only one I have out of the other sets, the Arabian Nights Entertainment. But I've got several sets of books with lots and lots of stories. And since this series, I've done over 375 stories now, and there's at least 40 left to go. I haven't counted how many were in the last book. This one was 20-something. But yeah, feel free to get comfy, settle back, relax, wrap up in a blanket because it's freaking cold outside. Book cracked. And we'll get into stories. So, our first story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales. A longbow story. One day, a banaya, or banker, was walking along a country road when he overtook a farmer going in the same direction. Now the banaya was very grasping, like most of his class, and was lamenting that he had no chance of taking money that day, but at the sight of a man in front, he brightened up wonderfully. "This is a piece of luck," he said to himself. "Let me see if this farmer is not good for something." And he hastened his steps. After they had bid one another good day very politely, the banaya said to the farmer, "I was just thinking how dull I felt when I beheld you, but since we are going the same way, I shall find the road quite short in such agreeable company." "With all my heart," replied the farmer. "But what shall we talk about? A city man like you will not care to hear about cattle and crops." "Oh," said the banaya, "I'll tell you what we will do. We will each tell us the other the wildest tale we can imagine, and he who first throws doubt on the other's story shall pay him 100 rupees. To this the farmer agreed, and begged the Banaya to begin, as he was the bigger man of the two, and privately he had made up his mind that, however improbable it might be, nothing should induce him to hint that he did not believe the Banaya's tale. Thus politely pressed, the great man started. I was going along this road one day when I met a merchant traveling with a great train of camels laden with merchandise. Very likely, murmured the farmer. I've seen that kind of thing myself. No less than 101 camels, continued the Banaya, all tied together by the nose strings, nose to tail, and stretching along the road for almost half a mile. Well, said the farmer. Well, a kite swooped down on the foremost camel and bore him off, struggling into the air, and by reason of them all being tied together, the other 100 camels had to follow. Amazing, the strength of that kite, said the farmer. But, well, yes, doubtless. Well, yes, 101 camels, and what did he do with them? You doubt it? Demanded the Banaya. Not a bit, said the farmer heartily. Well, continued the Banaya, it happens that a princess of the neighboring kingdom was sitting in her private garden, having her hair combed by her maid, and she was looking upward with her head thrown back, whilst the maid tugged away at the comb, when that wretched kite with its prey went soaring overhead, and, as luck would have it, the camels gave an extra kick just then, and the kite lost his hold, and the whole 101 camels dropped right into the princess's left eye. Poor thing, said the farmer. It's so painful having anything in one's eye. Well, said the Banaya, who was now warming to the task, the princess shook her head and sprang up, clasping her hand on her eye. Oh dear, she cried, I've got something in my eye, and how it does smart. It always does, observed the farmer. Perfectly true. Well, what did the poor thing do? At the sound of her cries, the maid came running to her assistance. Let me look, she said, and with that she gave the princess's eyelid a twitch, and out came a camel, which the maid put into her pocket. Grunted the farmer. And then she just twisted up the corner of her headcloth and flushed out 100 more of them out of the princess's eye, and popped them all into her pocket with the other. Here the Banaya gasped, as one who is out of breath, but the farmer looked at him slowly. Well, he said. I can't think of anything more now, replied the Banaya. Besides, that is the end. What do you say to it? Oh, wonderful, replied the farmer, and no doubt perfectly true. Well, it is your turn, said the Banaya. I am so anxious to hear your story. I am sure it will be very entertaining. Yes, I think it will, answered the farmer, and he began. My father was a very prosperous man. 5 cows had he, and 3 yoke of oxen, and half a dozen buffaloes. Hey, Parmius. And goats in abundance. But of all his possessions, the thing he loved most was a mare. A well-bred mare she was, too. Oh, and very fine mare. Yes, yes, interrupted the Banaya. Get on. I'm getting on, said the farmer. Don't hurry me. Well, one day, as ill luck would have it, he rode that mare to market with a torn saddle, which galled her so, that when they got home, she had a sore on her back as big as the palm of your hand. Yes, said the Banaya impatiently. What's next? It was June, said the farmer, and you know how in June the air is full of dust storms with rain at times. Well, the poor beast got dust in that wound, and what's more, with the dust some grains of wheat, and with that dust and the heat and the wet, the wheat sprouted and began to grow. Wheat does that when it gets a fair chance, said the Banaya. Yes, and the next thing we knew, that there was a crop of wheat on the horse's back as big as anything you ever saw in a 100-acre field, and we had to hire 20 men to reap it. One generally has to hire extra hands for reaping, said the Benaiah. We got 400 mods of wheat off that mare's back, continued the farmer. A good crop, murmured the Benaiah. And your father, said the farmer, a poor wretch with hardly enough to keep body and soul together, the Benaiah snorted but was silent, came to my father, and he said, putting his hands together as humble as he could be. The Benaiah here flashed a furious glance at his companion, but bit his lips and held his peace. I haven't tasted food for a week. Oh, great master, let me have a load of 16 mods of wheat from your store, and I will repay you. Certainly, neighbor, answered my father. Take what you need and repay it when you can. Well, demanded the Benaiah with fury in his eye. Well, he took what wheat away with him, replied the farmer, but he never repaid it, and it's a debt to this day. Sometimes I wonder whether I shall not go to law about it. When the Benaiah began running his thumb quickly up and down his fingers of his right hand, and his lips moved with a quick calculation. What's the matter? Asked the farmer. The wheat is a cheaper. I'll pay you for the wheat, said the Benaiah, with the calmness of despair, as he remembered that his own arrangement was bound to give the farmer 100 rupees. And to this day they say in those parts, when a man owes a debt, give me the money, or if not that, give me at least the wheat. Okay, that was a weird story. I guess when you bring farmer into the contest, anyway. Second story for the night. Jackal or Tiger? One hot night in Hindustan, a king and queen lay awake in the palace in the midst of the city. Every now and then a faint air blew through the lattice, and they hoped they were going to sleep, but they never did. Presently they became more broad awake than ever at the sound of a howl outside the palace. Listen to that tiger, remarked the king. Tiger, replied the queen. How should there be a tiger inside the city? It was only a jackal. I told you it was a tiger, cried the queen. Don't contradict me. Nonsense, snapped the queen. It was a jackal. And the dispute waxed so warm that the king said at last, Very well, I'll call the guard and ask. And if it was a jackal, I'll leave this kingdom to you and go away. And if it was a tiger, then you shall go, and I will marry a new wife. As you like, answered the queen. There isn't any doubt which it was. So the king called 2 soldiers who were on guard outside and put the question to them. But whilst the dispute was going on, the king and queen got so excited and talked so loud that the guards had nearly heard everything they said, and one man observed to the other, Mind you, declare that the king is right. It certainly was a jackal, but if we say so, the king will probably not keep his word about going away, and we shall get in trouble, so we'd better take his side. To this the other agreed. Therefore, when the king asked them what animal they had seen, both of the guards said it was certainly a tiger, and that the king was right, of course, as he always was. The king made no remark, but sent for a palanquin, and ordered the queen to be placed in it, bidding the 4 beaters of the palanquin to take her a long way off into the forest and leave her there. In spite of her tears, she was forced to obey, and away the bearers went for 3 days and 3 nights, until they came to a dense wood. There they sat down the palanquin, with the queen in it, and started home again. Now the queen thought to herself that the king could not mean to send her away for good, and that as soon as he had got over his fit of temper, he would summon her back. So she stayed quite still for a long time, listening with all her ears for approaching footsteps, but heard none. After a while she grew nervous, for she was all alone, and put her head out of the palanquin and looked about her. Day was just breaking, and birds and insects were beginning to stir. The leaves rustled in a warm breeze, but although the queen's eyes wandered in all directions, there was no sign of any human being. Then her spirit gave way, and she began to cry. It so happened that close to the spot where the queen's palanquin had been set down, there dwelt a man who had a tiny farm in the midst of the forest, where he and his wife lived alone, far from any neighbors. As it was hot weather, the farmer had been sleeping on the flat roof of the house, but was awakened by the sound of weeping. He jumped up and ran downstairs as fast as he could, and into the forest towards the place where the sound had come from, and there he found the palanquin. "Oh, poor soul that weeps," cried the farmer, standing a little way off. "Who are you?" At this situation from a stranger, at this salutation from a stranger, the queen grew silent, dreading she knew not what. "Oh, you that weep," replied the farmer, "fear not to speak to me, for you are to me as a daughter. Tell me who you are." His voice was so kind that the queen gathered up her courage and spoke. And when she had told her story, the farmer called his wife, who led her to their house and gave her food to eat and a bed to lie on. And in the farm, a few days later, a little prince was born by his mother's wish, named Amir Ali. Years passed without a sign from the king. His wife might have been dead for all he seemed to care, though the queen still lived with the farmer, and the little prince by this time had grown up into a strong and handsome and healthy youth. Out in the forest they seemed far from the world. Very few ever came near them, and the prince was continually begged his mother and the farmer to be allowed to go away and seek adventures and to make his own living. But she and the wise farmer always counseled him to wait until, at last, when he was 18 years of age, they had not the heart to forbid him any longer. So he started off one early morning, with a sword by his side, a big brass pot to hold water, and a few pieces of silver, and a galil, or two-stringed bow, in his hand, with which to shoot birds as he traveled. Many a weary mile he tramped day after day, until one morning he saw before him just such a forest as that which he was born in and bred, and joyfully stepped into it, like one who goes to meet an old friend. Presently, as he made his way through a thicket, he saw a pigeon which he thought would make a good dinner, so he fired a pellet at it from his glaive, but missed the pigeon, which fluttered away with a startling clatter. At the same instant he heard a great clamor from beyond the thicket, and on reaching the spot, he found an ugly old woman streaming wet and crying loudly as she shifted her head with the earthen vessel with a hole in it from which the water was pouring. When she saw the prince with the gazelle in his hand, she cried out, "Oh, wretched one, why must you choose an old woman like me to play your pranks on? Where am I to get a fresh pitcher instead of this one that you have broken with your foolish tricks? And how am I to go so far for water twice when one journey wearies me?" "But, mother," replied the prince, "I played no trick upon you. I did but shoot at a pigeon that would have served me for dinner. As my pellet missed it, it must have broken your pitcher. But in exchange you shall have my brass pot, and that will not break easily. As for getting water, tell me where to find it, and I'll fetch it while you dry your garments in the sun, and carry it whither you will." At this the old woman's face brightened, and she showed him where to seek the water, and when he returned a few minutes later with his pot filled to the brim, she led the way without a word, and he followed. In a short while they came to a hut in the forest, and as they drew near it, Amir Ali beheld in the doorway the loveliest damsel his eyes had ever looked on. Which, I guess, honestly wouldn't be hard since he's been in a forest his entire life. But anyway, at the sight of a stranger, she drew her veil around her and stepped into the hut, and much as he wished to see her again, Amir Ali could think of no excuse by which to bring her back, and so, with a heavy heart, he made a salutation and bade the old woman farewell. But when he had gone a little way, she called after him, "If you're ever in trouble or danger, come to where you stand now and cry, 'Fairy of the forest, fairy of the forest, help me now,' and I will listen to you." The prince thanked her and continued his journey, but he thought little of the woman's saying, and much of the lovely damsel. Shortly afterwards he travelled to the city, and as he was now in great straits, having come to the end of his money, he walked straight to the palace of the king and asked for employment. The king said he had plenty of servants and wanted no more, but the young man pleaded so hard that at last the Rajah was sorry for him. No, Raja. Alas, the Rajah was sorry for him, and promised that he should enter his bodyguard on one condition, that he would undertake any service which was especially difficult or dangerous. This was just what Amir Ali wanted, and he agreed to do whatever the king might wish. Soon after this, on a dark and stormy night, when the river roared beneath the palace walls, and the sound of a woman weeping and wailing was heard above the storm, the king ordered a servant to go and see what was the matter, but the servant, falling to his knees in terror, begged that he might not be sent on such an errand, particularly on so wild a night, when evil spirits and witches were sure to be abroad. Indeed, so frightened was he that the king, who was very kind-hearted, bade another to go in his stead. Each one showed the same strange fear. Then Amir Ali stepped forward. "This is my duty, your majesty," he said. "I will go." The king nodded, and off he went. The night was as dark as pitch, and the wind blew furiously and drove the rain in sheets into his face, but he made his way down to the ford under the palace walls and stepped into the flooded river. Inch by inch and foot by foot he sought his way across, now nearly swept off his feet by a sudden swirl or eddy, now narrowly escaping being caught by the branches of some floating tree that came tossing and swinging down the stream. At length he emerged, panting and dripping wet, on the other side. Close by the bank stood a gallows, and on the gallows hung a body of some evildoer, whilst from the foot of it came the sound of sobbing that the king had heard. Amir Ali was so grieved for the one that wept there that he thought nothing of the wildness of the night or of the roaring river. As for ghosts and witches, they never troubled him, so he walked towards the gallows where the crouched figure of a woman was. "What ails you?" he said. Now, the woman was not really a woman at all, but a horrid kind of witch who really lived in Witchland and had no business on earth. If ever a man strayed into Witchland, the ogres used to eat him up, and this old witch thought that she would catch a man for supper, and that is why she had been sobbing and crying in hopes that someone might pity her and come to her rescue. So, when Amir Ali questioned her, she replied, "Oh, kind sir, it is my poor son who hangs upon the gallows. Help me get him down, and I will bless you forever." Amir Ali thought that her voice sounded rather eager than sorrowful, and he suspected that she was not telling the truth, so he determined to be very cautious. "That will be rather difficult," he said, "for the gallows is high, and we have no ladder." "Ah, but if you just stoop down and let me climb upon your shoulders," answered the old witch, "I think I can reach him." And her voice now sounded so cruel that Amir Ali was sure that she intended some evil. But he only said, "Very well, we will try." And with that he drew his sword, and pretending that he needed it to lean upon, he bent so that the old woman could clamber onto his back, which she did very nimbly. Then suddenly he felt a noose slipped over his neck, and the old witch sprang from his shoulders onto the gallows, crying, "Now, foolish one, I've got you, and will kill you for my supper." But Amir Ali gave a sweep upwards with a sharp sword to cut the rope, so that she had slipped around his neck, and not only cut the cord, but also cut off the old woman's foot as it dangled above him, and with a yell of pain and anger, she vanished into the darkness. Amir Ali then sat down to collect himself a little, and felt upon the ground by his side an anklet, which had evidently fallen from the old witch's foot. He put this into his pocket, and as the storm had come this time and passed over, he made his way back to the palace. When he had finished his story, he took the anklet out of his pocket and handed it to the king, who, like everyone else, was amazed at the glory of the jewels which composed it. Indeed, Amir Ali himself was astonished, for he had slipped the anklet into his pocket in the dark and had not looked at it since. The king was delighted at its beauty, and having praised and rewarded Amir Ali, he gave the trinket to his daughter, and proud, a spoiled princess. Now the woman's apartment in the palace were hung two cages, and one of which was a parrot, and the other a starling, and these two birds could talk as well as any human being. They were both pets of the princess, who always fed them herself. And the next day, as she was walking grandly about with her treasure tied around her ankle, she heard the starling say to the parrot, "Oh, Toti," that was the parrot's name, "how do you think the princess looks in her new jewel?" "Think?" snapped the parrot, who was cross because they hadn't given him his bath in the morning. "I think she looks like a washerwoman's daughter, with one shoe on and the other off. Why doesn't she wear two of them, instead of going with one leg adorned and the other empty?" When the princess heard this, she burst into tears, and sending her father, who she declared that he must get her another such anklet on the other leg to wear, or she would die of shame. So the king sent for Amir Ali and told him that he must get a second anklet, exactly like the first, within a month, or he should be hanged, for the princess would certainly die of disappointment. Poor Amir Ali was greatly troubled at the king's command, but he thought to himself that he had, at any rate, a month in which to lay his plans. He left the palace once more, and inquired of everyone where the finest jewels were to be got, but though he sought night and day, he never found one to compare with the anklet. At last, only a week remained, and he was in sore difficulty, when he remembered the Fairy of the Forest, and determined to go without loss of time and seek her. Therefore away he went. After a day's travelling he reached the cottage in the forest, and standing where he had stood when the old woman called to him, he cried, "Fairy of the Forest! Fairy of the Forest! Help me! Help me!" Then there appeared at the doorway the beautiful girl he had seen before, whom in all his wanderings he had never forgotten. "What's the matter?" she asked, in a soft voice that he listened like one struck dumb, and she had to repeat the question before he could answer. Then he told her his story, and she went within the cottage and came back with two wands and a pot of boiling water. The two wands she planted in the ground about 6 feet apart, and then, turning to him, she said, "I'm going to lie down between these two wands. You must then draw your sword and cut off my foot, and as soon as you have done that, you must seize it and hand it over the cauldron, and every drop of blood that falls from it into the water will become a jewel. Next you must change the wand so that the one stood by my head at the feet, and the one at my feet stands at my head, and place the severed foot against the wound, and it will heal, and I shall become quite well again as before." At first Amir Ali declared that he would sooner be hanged 20 times over than to treat her so roughly, but at length she persuaded him to do her bidding. He nearly fainted with horror when he found out that, after the cruel blow which lopped off her foot, she lay as one lifeless. But he held the severed foot over the cauldron, and as drops of blood fell from it, and he saw each turn into the water into a shining gem, his heart took courage. Very soon there were plenty of jewels in the cauldron, and he quickly changed the wands and placed the severed foot against the wound, and immediately the two parts became as one before. Then the maiden opened her eyes and sprang to her feet, and drawing her veil around her, she ran into the hut, and would not come out to speak to him any more. For a long time he waited, but as she did not appear, he gathered up the precious stones and returned to the palace. He easily got someone to set the jewels and found that there were enough to make not only one, but 3 rare and beautiful anklets, and these duly presented the king on the very day that his month of grace was over. The king embraced him warmly and made him rich gifts. The next day the vain princess put 2 anklets on each foot and started up and down on them, admiring herself in the mirrors that lined her room.
"Now, Toti,"
Answered Starling,
"how do you think the princess looks now in these fine jewels?"
"Ah!" growled the parrot, who was really always cross in the mornings and never recovered his temper until after lunch.
"She's got all her beauty at one end of her now. If she had those few fine gewgaws around her neck and wrists, she would look much better. But now, in my mind, she looks more than ever like a washerwoman's daughter, dressed up."
Poor princess. She wept and stormed and raved until she made herself quite ill, and then she declared to her father that unless she had bracelets and a necklace to match the anklets, she would die. Princesses. Again the king sent for Amir Ali and ordered him to get a necklace and bracelets to match those anklets within a month, or be put to a cruel death. Again, Amir Ali spent nearly a whole month searching for the jewels, but all in vain. At length he made his way to the hut in the forest and stood, and he cried,
Fairy of the forest, help me, help me."
Once more the beautiful maiden appeared at his summons and asked what he wanted, and when he told her, she said she must do exactly as he had done the first time, except now that he must cut off both her hands and her head. Her words turned Amir Ali pale with horror, but she reminded him that no harm had come to her before, and at last he consented to do as she bade him. From her severed hands and head fell into the cauldron bracelets and chain of rubies and diamonds, emeralds and pearls that surpassed any that were ever seen before. Then the head and hands were joined to the body, and left neither sign nor scar. Full of gratitude, Amir Ali tried to speak to her, but she ran into the house and would not come back, and he was forced to leave her and go away laden with the jewels. When, on the day appointed, Amir Ali produced a necklace and bracelets, each more beautiful and priceless than the last, the king's astonishment knew no bounds, and as for his daughter, she was nearly mad with joy. The very next morning she put on all her finery and thought that now, at least, the disagreeable parrot would find no fault in her appearance. So she listened eagerly and heard what the starling said.
"Oh, Toti, how do you think the princess is looking now?" "Very fine, no doubt," grumbled the parrot. "But what is the use of dressing up like that for oneself only? She ought to have a husband. Why doesn't she marry the man who got her all these splendid things?"
Then the princess sent for her father and told him that she wished to marry Amir Ali. "My dear child," said the father, "you really are very difficult to please, and want something new every day. It certainly is time you married someone, and if you choose this man, of course he shall marry you." So the king sent for Amir Ali, and told him that within a month he proposed to do him the honor of marrying him to the princess, and making him heir to the throne. On hearing this speech, Amir Ali bowed low and answered that he had done and would do the king all the service that lay in his power, save only for this one thing. The king, who considered his daughter's hand a prize for any man, flew into a passion, and the princess was more furious still. Amir Ali was instantly thrown into the most dismal prison that they could find, in order to keep there until the king had had time to think in what way he should be put to death. Meanwhile, the king determined that the princess ought in any case be married without delay, so he sent forth heralds throughout the neighboring countries, proclaiming that on a certain day any person fitted for a bridegroom and heir to the throne should present himself at the palace. When the day came, all the court were gathered, and the great crowd assembled of men, young and old, who thought that they had a good chance as anyone to gain both the throne and the princess. As soon as the king was seated, he called upon the usher to summon the first claimant. But then a farmer stood in front of the crowd, cried out that he had a petition to offer. "Well, hasten then," said the king. "I have no time to waste." "Your Majesty," said the farmer, "has now lived and administered justice long in the city, and will know that the tiger, who is the king of beasts, hunts only in the forest, whilst Jackal is hunted every place where there's something to be picked up." "What is all this? What is all this?" asked the king. "The man must be mad." "No, your Majesty," answered the farmer. "I would only remind your Majesty that there are plenty of jackals gathered today and tried to claim your daughter and kingdom. Every city has sent them, and they wait, hungry and eager. But do not, O king, mistake or pretend again to mistake the howl of a jackal for the hunting cry of a tiger." The king turned first red and then pale. "There is," continued the farmer, "a royal tiger bred in the forest who was first and the only true claim to your throne." "Where? What do you mean?" stammered the king, growing pale as he listened. "In prison," replied the farmer. "If your Majesty will clear his court of jackals, I will explain." "Clear the court," commanded the king, and very unwillingly the visitors left the palace. "Now tell me what riddle this is," he said. Then the farmer told the king and his ministers how he had rescued the queen and brought up Amir Ali, and he fetched the old queen herself, whom he had left outside. At the sight of her, the king was filled with shame and self-reproach, and wished he could have lived his life over again, and had not married the mother of the proud princess, who caused him endless trouble until her death. "My day is past," said he, and he gave up his crown to his son Amir Ali, who went once more and called to the forest fairy to provide him with a queen to share his throne. "There is only one person I will marry," said he, and this time the maiden did not run away, but agreed to be his wife. So the two were married without delay, and lived long and reigned happily. As for the old woman whose pitcher Amir Ali had broken, she was the forest maiden's fairy godmother, and when she was no longer needed to look after the girl, she gladly returned to fairyland. The old king has never been heard to contradict his wife any more, and if he looks as if he does not agree with her, she smiles at him and says, "Is it the tiger, then, or the jackal?" And he has not another word to say. I'm pretty sure I've narrated that one before. Say, I would say just never argue with your wife, but that would be too easy a topic. Alright, so Count Anthony Hamilton's fairy tales. Interesting. Our next story, The Comb and the Collar. Once upon a time there was a king of Lombardy who, though he was uglier than any of his subjects, loved beauty in others. So he married a wife who was declared by everyone to be the handsomest of women, and whispered some, the most ill-natured also. Certainly she could not endure the sight of a pretty person, and her ladies were all the plainest of their sex. Worst of all, she was desperately jealous of the king's son and daughter by his former wife. Unfortunately, in spite of all her evil qualities, the king was her complete slave, and badly though she treated the boy, the lovely princess was made to suffer 10 times as much. Not contented with giving the girl for a governess, a woman whose temper was as bad as the queen's own, the cruel stepmother did everything she could to spoil the girl's beauty and to force her to appear as ugly as she was herself. But, try as she might, When the hideous clothes and frightful brown paint had been removed, her loveliness shone out as bright as ever. Now, the King of Lombardy was a cousin to the Archduke of Placenza, who had lately lost his reason, to the great grief of his son and daughter, Perathares and Ferrandina. The daughters having all failed to restore him to health, the prince and princess sent a messenger to consult the famous enchantress called the Mother of Sheaths. Yes, that is very true. Because everyone who visited her brought with him a knife, which she thrust into one of the sheaths with which her cabin was lined. However, they obtained little comfort from the witch, who bade them
seek the father's wits in the place where he had lost them.
Against the wishes of the chief ministers, Perathares and Ferrandina rode off to the mysterious castle where the king had slept when his terrible fate had overtaken him, and once inside the gates, nothing more was heard of them. When 3 weeks had passed and still there was no news, the king's chief minister called a council to talk over the matter, and at the end it was decided that a company of distinguished persons should visit the Mother of Sheaths, and that the knives they must take with them should be of pure gold set with precious stones. The witch was so pleased with the beauty of the gifts that she not only listened attentively to their story, but proceeded to hole in a cavern from which she drew out a little case containing a comb and a steel collar fastened by a gold key.
Carry this comb and the collar to every court until you find a lady beautiful enough to unlock the collar, and a man good enough to draw the comb from its case. When you have discovered these, you can return whence you came.
But I do not see, said the chamberlain, how it will be help of us in bringing back our lost prince and princess.
It is all I can do for you,
answered the Mother of Sheaths, and she went back to and she went back into the cavern where they dared not follow her. For the next few months, the Mad King's principal ministers wandered from one court to another, until they at last reached Lombardy, where they found that their story had already traveled before them. As soon as they appeared in the presence chamber, the king received them with open arms, for in his heart he had no doubt that his wife was a peerless beauty destined to unfasten the collar. And indeed, if paint and hair dye and magnificent dresses could have endured so If paint and hair dye and magnificent dresses could have ensured her doing so, he would have certainly been right. But, blinded by his love for this wicked woman, he really had no idea that her charms were not her own. At the appointed hour, the queen entered the throne room, having by her side the young princess, in a most grievous plight imaginable. Her dress was so contrived as to give the idea that she had a hump. Her white and pink skin was thickly covered with yellow paint, and her black hair was hidden by a close-fitting brown cloth cap. Murmurs of indignation rose on all sides, and the ambassadors, who had frequently heard the princess compared to the lovely Ferrandina, were dumb with astonishment. As for the king, he could hardly raise his eyes from the ground, so ashamed was he, and signing to his son to take his place, he withdrew from the scene. Mounting the throne, the prince commanded the trial to begin at once, and the collar was handed to the princess's governess, who, being one of the ugliest women who was ever seen, naturally failed to turn the key. Seizing the chance for his being for a short time in power, the prince resolved to punish the cruelties towards his sister, and especially this last one, to which she had prompted the queen, and ordered her to be taken out and executed, which was done, with great goodwill, by the attendants. Then he further commanded the ladies in waiting to attend to his sister in her apartments, and bathe her and dress her in the queen's most splendid robes, and she had none of her own. And the queen, though gnashing her teeth with anger, for once dared not interfere. More quickly than they could have expected, the princess returned, looking so beautiful that if anyone had doubted before who would be able to unlock the collar, They were instantly convinced. The prince glanced at her, but said nothing, and signing to one of the ambassadors, he ordered him to take the trial of the comb. One by one, each man present did his best to remove it from the case, and one by one, each was forced himself beaten. At length, only the prince remained, but as he was the judge, he must wait until the last. After the men had finished, the ladies of the court had the collar presented to them according to rank. But none could even turn the key. Finally it was handed to the queen, who managed to open it a little way. Her heart beat with triumph, but immediately it closed again with a snap, and she sank back, fainting from disappointment. By this time there was only left the prince and his sister, and no sooner did he touch the case than it opened itself, while the lock of the collar yielded directly as the princess took hold of the key. Cries of delight rose from the courtiers and attendants, but these were interrupted by a whirlwind accompanied by thick darkness, and followed by an earthquake. When all was calm again, and the sunshine, and the prince and princess had disappeared. Most of my books, at least in this series, are about 100 years old. Well, I have reprints, but still. Although the king's daughter and son were the only persons who had vanished from the storm, unluckily they had been carried off in opposite directions. The rapid motion through the air deprived the princess of her senses, which she nearly lost a second time, from fright when she was set down alone in the middle of a thick forest. She ran wildly about, calling to her brother to come to her aid, but her cries only attracted the attention of some hungry wolves, who sprung towards her with their jaws gaping and their red tongues hanging out. Falling on her knees, she covered her face with one hand, unconsciously grasping the collar with the other, and awaited her doom. Already she could feel their hot breath on her cheek, and crouched lower and lower, when the eyes of the foremost wolf caught sight of the collar. With a howl that echoed through the forest, he bounded away, followed by his companions. As soon as the princess had recovered from the shock, she rose and fled, without knowing whither, until she found herself on a broad road, and beheld, approaching her, a flock of sheep driven by two shepherds. She hastened towards them in order to implore their help, when suddenly the sheep caught sight of the collar, and instantly scattered in all directions. "I must have something about me which frightens a beast," she thought, and took great comfort therefrom, and in good spirits she went her way, till she came to the gates of an old castle. She was just about to enter and beg for a night's shelter, when a snow-white fox ran across the road, and stopped in front of her. Well, the stories in these are older than the actual books. He was so pretty and had such bright beseeching eyes that the princess hastily tucked the collar under her dress, lest he should flee at the sight of it. Very gently she drew near, and hoping he might follow her into the castle, but he only set off in another direction, and tired as she was, something forced the girl to follow him. Thankful indeed was she when she returned the corner and sat down at the door of the tiny palace, which was built on the bank of a river. When she came up, he took the hem of her dress between his teeth and led her into a room where there was a table covered with milk and fruit. After she had eaten and drunk, she lay down upon a pile of cushions with the fox at her feet and fell asleep to dream of her lost brother. If the princess was dreaming of her brother, he was no less thinking of her, and on the wild seashore where the whirlwind had cast him, all was bleak and bare, except a green island which he could see only from the top of a high rock where he passed all his days, and gazing at the waving palm trees and glittering waterfalls in the distance. "Suppose she should be there," he said to himself, And though there was no reason to expect the princess should be in a place any more than any other, he could not get the notion out of his head. A song, sung in the loveliest voice he had ever heard, roused the young man from his musings, and he instantly turned the direction in which it had come from. But though the singer seemed close to him, he could see her nowhere, and indeed no sooner had he reached the spot than the voice sounded in another direction. Then he followed it up and down till he suddenly stopped at the sight of a large fish's skin which lay stretched on the sand between the rocks and the sea. The thing was so ugly that he stepped aside in disgust, and at that instant something leapt into the sea behind his back. This caused him to look around. The fish's skin was no longer there, but in a cave in the rock behind it he discovered a bath of ebony lined with gold, which glittered in the sunlight. Days passed without any adventures, but the prince had almost made up his mind to leave the shore and to seek the sister inland, when once more he heard the voice that had so charmed him, and beheld the bloody skin laying in the sand, and the bath now filled with water in the grotto. A little sleep he had that night, and before dawn he hid himself behind the rocks, determined not to move from the place till the fish should come back again. He had not long to wait, for the first rays of the sun were appeared out of the sea, a shining white object which was blown by gentle breezes towards the shore. As it came nearer, he beheld a maiden of dazzling loveliness, seated in a shell where blues and pinks and greens all melted into each other, and in her hand she held a rope which the shell was guided. The prince was so bewildered at her beauty that he forgot that he was hiding, and rushed out, and sank to his knees on the sand, holding out his hands towards this wonderful vision. But as he did so, the comb in its case fell out of his pocket, and the sight of the lady uttered a wild shriek, and steering her shell around, vanished speedily in the direction of the island. Throwing off his clothes, the prince was preparing to swim after her, when he perceived beside him a snow-white fox looking the same way, and making frantic signs with his paws, till a small boat was put out and set sail towards him, to the great joy of the little creature. When the boat drew up on the beach, the fox waved its paw toward the prince's clothes, which he took to mean that he was to put them on again. This done, they both got in, and had just pushed off, when the prince suddenly recollected that the sight of the comb had frightened away the beautiful lady. In a transport of fury he raised his hand to fling it into the sea, but the fox sprang on him and held on so tightly to his arm that he could not lift it. At the moment a horseman on the shore let an arrow fly at the fox, with so true an aim that the little creature fell heavily into the well of the boat, and closed its eyes, like one who has received his death blow. The grief of the prince was sore. He instantly leaped to land, about to murder, but the murderer was already far distant. When the young man turned around, the boat and the fox were nowhere to be seen. An approaching storm drove them into the grotto, which was lighted up by a multitude of tapers, each one being the shape of a knife half out of its sheath. Over the bath was a tent-shaped covering with white embroidered with sheaths, and from beneath it came a voice.
Prince, will you trust me whatever happens, knowing that my heart is yours and I will feel that yours is mine? But beware, for if you give the smallest sign of fear when the tent is opened, you will lose me forever.
She did well to warn him, and even then he had much to do to keep the color in his cheeks and his hand from trembling, for a crocodile's head with snapping jaws advanced towards him. With a mighty effort he managed to remain still, and to gaze steadily at the horrible beast, and as so he did, the head bent backwards, and beneath it was the lovely countenance of the lady from the shell.
Quick, Prince, quick! The time is flying. Come at once, or I shall vanish from your sight.
At her words he took out the comb, but found to his surprise that it needed all his strength to draw it from the sheath. And strange to say that the proportion of the comb emerged from its sheath, and the lady's head was freed from its horrible covering, and her body rose a little more out of the water. When her shoulders and arms were freed, she called to him.
Enough, so far you have obeyed my orders. Now burn my skin." "Ah, that I could never do," cried he, but the lady cut him short. "Then we shall both rue it forever," she said gravely, "for I can only be the wife of him who will burn my skin."
And while he stood hesitating, the curtains of the tent fell back on her and the tapers fizzled out. Bitterly repenting his slowness, he wandered towards a forest where a fire was burning, hardly knowing what he did, but on his way he almost fell over the skin, which was lying across the path. "Ah, fool that I was! This must be the skin she wished me to burn," said he, and seizing it in both hands he flung it into the fire, where it exploded with a terrific noise. At first he rushed off to some distance, not knowing what might befall next, but after a while he found that his steps had led him back to the place of the fire. The skin had gone and left no traces, but among the cinders he beheld something shining, which proved to be the magic collar. Ah, then his sister, for whom he had so greatly longed, must be near at last. Before he could turn his head or pick up the collar, her arms were round his neck, and everything else was forgotten.
"You should tell your story first," said she,
When at length they could speak, and so he did, but his head was so full of the Lady of the Shell that he forgot to say anything about the fox, and it was well that he had forgotten, for when the princess had poured forth her own adventures, she ended up speaking of all she owed to the little white fox.
"I could not even guess that he took care of me in the little palace, but though nothing could exceed his kindness, I saw in his eyes that there was something he wanted to give me, but I could not tell what. Alas, the day came that I learned it at my cost. I had hidden the collar in a thick bush, lest the fox should catch sight of it and be scared away like the other animals had been. But one day, when we were in the garden, the sun happened to shine straight on it, and he sprang towards it with every sign of delight. I was about to seize it between his teeth when it closed with a loud noise. The fox fled away with a piercing scream, and I sought him far and wide. I've never seen him since. I was here when you flung the skin into the cinders, and no doubt, but in my hurry to escape, the collar must have dropped from me, my dear brother," she continued with tears in her eyes. "I can no longer live without my beloved fox. Help me, I entreat you, to find him."
So great was her grief that the prince dared not tell her what sad fate had overcome the poor little animal, and trusted that time might soothe her. He assured her that he would go with her wherever she desired if she would grant him one day to spend with the seashore. With the princess, he was forced to be content. The prince was standing on a rock, looking out towards the lovely island, and straining his eyes to see the white sail once more, when frightful shrieks from the wood a little way caused him to hasten, and all his speed in that direction. He soon perceived the knight on horseback, with a bow slung on his back, struggling to lift a woman to his saddle. The knight's surprise at the sight of the man in this desolate spot caused him to drop the woman's arm, and she rushed to take shelter behind her defender, who, to his amazement, he then recognized as his stepmother. "How did you come here?" he asked cold, more than half regretting that he had not left her to her fate, but she read what was in his heart, and she fell on her knees before him.
"Oh, forgive me my wickedness," she cried, "for indeed I have repented it long ago, and come to the aid of your father, who has been sorely smited by the mad archduke from whom you have saved me. There is no time to pursue him,"
she added, and the prince started at the sound of vanishing hoofs, and as they pushed their way along the path, she told him all that had happened since they had left.
"From the moment that the king knew my cruelty to your sister," she said, "he vowed that he would never see me again, and left the court in search of both of you. I followed him secretly, and not being able to gain any tidings of him, consulted the mother of sheaves, who took me to a rest in the island where the palm trees were waving. Then she showed me a lovely princess who, under a spell, was forced daily to take the form of a crocodile, and when the dreaded moment arrived, the skin appeared before her, and, shudder she might, some unseen power impelled her to wrap herself in it and plunge into the sea. It is to this island I am leading you, but we first must find your sister, for her presence hangs in the life of the white fox, if indeed he is not dead already."
"The white fox!" exclaimed the prince. "What do you know of him?"
Not much, answered the queen. But since I arrived on the island, he is always with us, charmed us all. Yesterday we missed him, but in the evening a little boat drifted on the sands, and a fox covered with blood. While his wounds are being tended in the palace of all the care imaginable, I set out to consult a wizard who told me that he must enter the skiff and seek the prince and princess of Lombardy, and if in 24 hours I could bring them into the presence of the fox, his life would be saved. On a rock along the beach I found your father with an arrow through his shoulder, from the bow of his cousin, the Mad Archduke, who was drawing another from his quiver, destined for me when I fled to the forest.
My father is so near? Asked the prince. I must return and seek him, and also look for my sister. They found her in the grotto, with her father's head in her lap, trying vainly to staunch his wounds. Between them they contrived to carry him to the boat, which sailed swiftly towards the island. On the way the prince gently broke to his sister the sad state of the white fox.
Take me to him,
she said, as soon as the boat touched the island, and in silence the queen went down the path to the palace. The white fox was laying on a soft mattress in front of a fire, his eyes closed, with a look on his face which told that death was not far distant. But he knew, somehow, that the princess was near him, and opened his eyes and wagged his tail feebly. The princess burst into sobs and tears, till a hand on her shoulder checked her. "Why do you waste the few moments that are left you in this manner?" asked the governor of the island sternly. "Place the collar you wear around his neck, and he will be cured at once, but you must act quickly." The princess turned to stone as she listened.
"The collar," she gasped. "But I've not got it. I lost it in the forest."
And 1,000 sheaths on the wall were hung. And the 1,000 sheaths with which the walls were hung took up the cry,
"The collar is lost! The collar is lost!"
"What collar are you speaking about?" asked the king, who was lying on another bed with the musicians bending over him. "Here is one that I picked up among some cinders before the madman shot me. Well, perhaps it might be the one you want, or in any event, it may do as well." And he signed to the attendant to take the collar from the pocket of his velvet jerkin. The princess leapt forward with joy at the sight of the precious thing, and snatching it up in the hand of the man, she placed it around the neck of the fox. All present held their breath as they watched what was happening, and what did happen was that his legs grew longer and longer, and his nose grew shorter and shorter. The fox was gone, and in its stead lay Paranthrites in a coat of thick white fur. Though the Prince of Lombardy was rejoiced to see his friend and cousin again, his heart still bled for the beautiful lady who had vanished so mysteriously. His face was so troubled that the governor of the island remarked it, and asked what was the matter. "Oh, help me if you can," cried the prince. "The thought of the sufferings of that enchanted nymph may be undergoing tortures." "They're far worse than you can imagine," replied gravely the governor. "But if you possess a comb, you might yet relieve her of them. Well, that is well," he continued, and the prince quickly drew the comb from its case. "Now follow me." Not only the prince, but everyone else followed, and the governor led them down a long gallery to a heavy iron door, which flew open at its own accord. But what a sight met the prince's eyes! The lady whom he had last beheld, peerless beauty, was sitting in a chair wrapped in the flames, which were twisting like hair around her head. Her face was swollen and red, her mouth was open, as if gasping for breath, only her arms and neck were as lovely as they were in their whiteness. "This is your doing," said the governor to the prince. "You brought her to this when you burnt the crocodile skin. Now try if, by combing you can soothe her again." At the first touch of the comb, the flames suddenly extinguished. At the sound, the look of pain vanished from her face, and it shrank into its usual size. At the third, she rose from the chair, lovelier than she was ever before, and flung herself into the arms of her brother Paranthrites. After this, there was nothing more to be done but to marry the two couples as fast as possible. And when the wedding was over, Paranthrites and his bride returned to Placenza, and Ferrandina and her husband to Lombardy, and they lived happily until they died. And that is the end of that story. And now we will have to go to ads. So I will see you in a few. Okay, so the Olive Fairy book was originally published in 1907, but the stories are from other books that they translated to put into this one. So it's like the one that we just finished, the Comb and the Color, was from Count Anthony Hamilton's Fairy Tales, which I may have to see if I can find a copy of that just for the hell of it. Quick search. Fairy Tales and Romances Count Alvin. See when this one was published. 1849. Old books. They are. I want to sell this copy for $484. I would rather pay my bills. The regular sale price is close to $49. I may look into it. Okay. Anyway, getting back to the stories from the Olive Fairy book. This one just says it's a Punjabi story, which doesn't really give a source other than oral tradition. So, and honestly, the person translating this just likes, instead of trying to explain India, they just say Hindustan, which is, I don't know. A lot of the books I get on here that are older, I would say they're racist, but it's not intentional racism. It's just the only way they can explain it. Anyway. The next story for this fabulous Friday Night of Fairy Tales. The Thanksgiving of the Wazir. Once upon a time there lived in Hindustan 2 kings whose countries bordered upon each other. But as they were rivals in wealth and power, and one was Hindu Raja and the other a Mohammedan Badshah, they were not good friends at all. In order, however, to escape the continual quarrels, the Raja and the Badshah had drawn up an agreement, stamped and signed, declaring that if any of their subjects, from the least to the greatest, crossed the boundary between the 2 kingdoms, he might be seized and punished. One morning, the Badshah and his chief Wazir, or Prime Minister, were just about to begin their morning's work over the affairs of the kingdom, when the Badshah had taken up a pen and was cutting it to his liking with a sharp knife, when the knife slipped and cut off the tip of the finger.
"Oh, here, Wazir," cried the king. "I've cut off the tip of my finger."
"That is good hearing," said the Wazir in answer.
"Insolent one," exclaimed the king. "Do you take pleasure at the misfortunes of others, and in mine also? Take him away, my guards, and put him to the court prison till I have found time to punish him as he deserves."
Instantly the officers in attendance seized upon the luckless Wazir and dragged him out of the king's presence towards the narrow doorway through which unhappy criminals were wont to be led to prison or execution. As the door opened to receive him, the Wazir muttered something to his great white beard which the soldiers could not hear.
"Where is the rascal?" shouted the angry king.
"He says he thanks your majesty," replied one of the jailers, and at his words the king stared at the closing door in anger and amazement.
"Oh, he must be mad," cried he, "for he's grateful not only for the misfortunes of others, but for his own. Surely something has turned his head."
Now the king was very fond of this old Wazir, and although the court physician came and bound up his finger with the cool and healing ointment and soothed the pain, he could not soothe the soreness of the king's heart, nor could any of all his ministers and courtiers, who found his majesty very cross all day long. Early next morning the king ordered his horse and declared that he would go hunting. Instantly was all the bustle and preparation in the stable hole, and by the time he was ready, a score of ministers and huntsmen stood ready to mount and accompany him. But to their astonishment, the king would have none of them. Instead, he glared at them so fiercely that they were glad to leave him. So away and away he wandered, over field and through forest, so moody and thoughtful that many a fat buck and gaudy pheasant escaped without notice, and so careless was he whither he was going that he stayed strayed without perceiving it into the Rajah's territory, and only discovered the fact when suddenly men stepped in from all sides of the thicket, and there was nothing left to do but surrender. Hey, Matsu. Then the poor Badsha was seized and bound and taken to the Rajah's prison, thinking most of the time of his vizier, who was suffering a similar fate, wishing that, like the vizier, he could feel that there was something to give thanks for. That night the Rajah held a special council to consider what should be done to his rival who had thus given himself into his hands. All of the Brahmins were sent for, or fat priests who understood about everything and what days were lucky and what were unlucky, and whilst the rest of the Rajah's counselors were offering him different advice until he was nearly crazy with anger and indecision, his chief Brahmin was squatting in a corner, figuring out sums and signs to himself with an admiring group of lesser priests around him. Alessi rose and advanced towards the throne. "Well," said the Rajah anxiously, "what have you to advise?"
"A very unlucky day," exclaimed the chief Brahmin. "Oh, a very unlucky day. The god Devi is full of wrath and commands that tomorrow you must chop off this Basha's head and offer it to him in sacrifice."
Well," said the Rajah, "let it be done. I leave it to you to carry out the sentence." And he bowed to the priests and left the room. Before dawn, great preparations were being made for a grand festival in honor of the great idol Devi. Hundreds of banners waved, hundreds of drummers drummed, hundreds of singers chanted chants, hundreds of priests, well washed and anointed, performed their sacred rites, whilst the Rajah sat, nervous and ill at ease, amongst hundreds of courtiers and servants, wishing it were all well over. At last the time came for the sacrifice to be offered, and the poor Badish was led out bound to have his head chopped off. Chief Brahmin came along with a smile on his face and a big sword in his hand, when suddenly he noticed that the Badish's finger was tied up in a bit of rag. Instantly he dropped his sword, and with his eyes starting out of his head with excitement, pounced upon the rag and tore it off. There he saw the tip of the victim's finger was missing. At this he got very red in anger indeed, and led the Badshah up to where the Rajah was sat wondering.
"Behold, O Rajah," he said, "this sacrifice is useless. The tip of his finger is gone. The sacrifice is no sacrifice unless it is complete."
And he began to weep with rage and mortification. But instead of wailing likewise, the Rajah gave a sign of relief and answered, "Well, that settles the matter. If it had been anyone else, I should have not minded, but somehow, and king and all, well, it doesn't quite seem right to sacrifice a king." With that he jumped up with his jeweled dagger and cut the Bashad's cords and marched him out of the temple and back to the palace. After having bathed and refreshed his guest, the Rajah loaded him with gifts and himself accompanied him to a large escort to the far frontier between the kingdoms, where, amidst salutes and great rejoicings, they tore up the old agreement and drew up another one, which each king promised welcome and safe conduct to any other's people, from the least to the greatest, whoever came over the border on whatever errand. And so they embraced, and each went his own way. When the Badshah got home that very evening, he was sent for his imprisoned vizier. "Well, O vizier," he said, when the old man had been brought before him, "what think you of what has happened to me?"
"How can a man in prison know what has happened outside?" answered the vizier.
Then the Badish told him of all his adventures, and when he had reached the end, he added, "I made up my mind, as a token of gratitude for my escape, to pardon you freely, if you tell me why you gave thanks when I cut off the tip of my finger."
"Sire," said the old vizier, "I am not right in thinking that it was a very lucky thing that you did cut off the tip of your finger, for otherwise you would certainly have lost your head. And to lose a scrap of one's finger is surely the least of two evils."
"Very true," answered the king, touching his head as he spoke, as if to make certain that it was all there. "But yet, why did you likewise give thanks when I put you in prison?"
I gave thanks, said the Vizier, because it is always good to give thanks, and I had known that my being in prison was to prevent the god Devi from claiming me instead of your majesty as a perfect offering. I should have given greater thanks still.
Okay. Huh. That was an interesting story. However short it was. I've lost count of how many stories I've done already. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we've done 4 stories so far. Might be able to do 1 or 2 more. Maybe. Okay. So where's this one from? Contes Sandalis. Okay. Next story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales. Samba the Coward. In the great country far away south, through which flows the river Nile, there lived a king who had an only child called Samba. Now, from the time that Samba could walk, he showed signs of being afraid of everything, and as he grew bigger, he became more and more frightened. At first his father's friends made light of it, and said to each other, "This is a strange boy to see a race running into a hut that's trumpeting of an elephant, and trembling in fear if a lion cub half his size comes near him. But after all, he is only a baby, and when he is older, he will be as brave as the rest." "Yes, he is only a baby," answered the king, who overheard them. "It will be all right by and by." Somehow he sighed as he said it, and the men looked at him and made no reply. The years passed away, and Samba had become tall and strong youth. He was good-natured and pleasant, and was liked by all, if during his father's hunting parties he was seldom to be seen in any place of danger. He was too great a favorite for much to be said. "When the king holds a feast and declares him to be the heir, he will cease to be a child," murmured the rest of the people. And they had done before, and on the day of the ceremony their hearts beat gladly, and they cried to each other, "It is Samba, Samba, whose chin is above the heads of all other men, who will defend us against the tribes of the robbers." Not many weeks after, the dwellers of the village awoke to find during the night their herds had been driven away and their herdsmen carried off into slavery by their enemies. Now was the time for Samba to show the brave spirit that had come to him in his manhood, and to ride forth at the head of the warriors of his race. But Samba could nowhere be found, and a party of avengers went on their way without him. It was many days later before he came back, with his head held high and the tail of a lion which he had tracked to his lair and killed, at the risk of his own life. A little while earlier his people would have welcomed his story and believed it all, but now it was too late. "Samba the Coward!" cried a voice from the crowd, and the name stuck to him. Even the very children shouted at him, and his father did not spare him. At length he could bear it no longer, and made up his mind to leave his own land for another where peace had reigned since the memory of man. So early next morning he slipped out into the king's stables, and choosing the quietest horse he could find, he rode away northwards. Never as long as he lived did Samba forget the terrors of that journey. He could hardly sleep at night for the dread of wild beasts that might be lurking behind every rock or bush, while by the day the distant roar of a lion would cause him to start so violently that he almost fell from his horse. A dozen times he was on the point of turning back, and it was not the terror of the mocking words and scornful laughs that kept him from doing so, but the terror lest he should be forced to take part in their wars. Therefore he held on, and deeply thankful he felt when the walls of a city, larger than he had ever dreamed of, rose before him. And drawing himself up to his full height, he rode proudly through the gate, and past the palace,
where, as was her custom, the princess was sitting on the terrace roof, watching the bustle of the street below.
That is a tall and gallant figure,
She thought, as Samba, mounted on his big black horse, steered his way skillfully among the crowds, and beckoning to a slave, she ordered him to go and meet the stranger, and ask him who he was and from whence he came.
"Oh, princess, he is the son of a king, and the heir to a country which lies near the great river," answered the slave, when he had returned from questioning Samba.
And the princess, on hearing this news, summoned her father and told him that if she was not allowed to wed the stranger, she would die unmarried. Like many other fathers, the king could refuse his daughter nothing. And besides, she rejected so many suitors that he was quite alarmed that no man should be good enough for her. Therefore, after a talk with Samba, who charmed him with his good humor and pleasant ways, he gave his consent, and 3 days later the wedding feast was celebrated with the utmost splendor. The princess was very proud of her tall, handsome husband, and for some time she was quite content that he should pass the days with her under the palm trees, telling her stories that she loved, or musing with the tales and the manners of customs of his country, which were so different from those of her own. But by and by, this was not enough. She wanted other people to be proud of him too, and one day she said,
I really almost wish that the Moorish thieves from the north would come on one robbing expeditions. I should love so to see you ride at the head of your men and chase them home again. Ah, how happy I should be when the city rang with your noble deeds.
Yeah, donkeys are good to make fun of. She looked lovingly at him as she spoke, but to her surprise his face grew dark, and he answered hastily, Never speak to me again of the Moors or of war. It was to escape from them that I fled from my own land. At the first word of invasion I should leave you forever.
How funny you are,
cried she, breaking into a laugh.
The idea of anyone as big as you being afraid of a Moor. But still, you mustn't say those things to anyone except me, or they might think you were in earnest.
Not very long after this, the people in the city were holding a great feast outside the walls of the town, and a body of Moors who had been hiding for days drove off all the sheep and goats which were peacefully feeding on the slopes of a hill. Directly the loss was discovered, which was not for some hours, the king gave orders that the war drum should be beaten. The warriors assembled in the great square of the palace, trembling with fury at the insults that had been put upon them. Loud were their cries for instant vengeance, and for Samba, son-in-law of the king, to lead them to battle. But, shout as they might, Samba never came. And where was he? No further than a cool, dark cellar of the palace, crouching among some earth-weaving pots of grain. With a rush of pain at her heart, there his wife found him, and she tried with all her strength to kindle him to a sense of shame, but in vain. Even the thought of the future danger he might run from the contempt of his subjects was nothing when compared to the risks at the present.
Take off your tunic of mail,
said the princess at last, and her voice was so stern and cold that none would have known it.
Give it to me and hand me besides your helmet, your sword, and your spear.
And with many fearful glances right and left, Samba stripped off the armor inlaid with gold and property of the king's son-in-law. Suddenly his wife took, one by one, the pieces from him, and fastened them on her with firm hands, never even glancing at the tall form of her husband, who had slunk back into his corner. When she had fastened the last buckle and lowered her visor, she went out, and mounting Samba's horse, gave the signal to the warriors to follow. Although the princess was much shorter than her husband, she was a tall woman, and the horse which she rode was likewise higher than the rest, so that when the men caught sight of the gold-inlaid suit and chain of armor, they did not doubt that it was Samba taking the rightful place. and cheered him loudly. The princess bowed in answer to their greeting, but kept her visor down, and touching her horse with her spur, she galloped at the head of the troops in charge of the enemy. The Moors, who did not expect to be followed so quickly, had scarcely time to form themselves into a battle array, and were speedily put to flight. When the little troop of horsemen returned to the city, Then the little troop of horsemen returned to the city, where all sung the praises of Samba, their leader. The instant they reached the palace, the princess flung her reins to a groom and disappeared up to a side staircase, by which she could, unseen, enter her own room. Here she found Samba lying idly in a heap of mats, but she raised his head uneasily as the door opened and looked at his wife. Here she found Samba laying idly on a heap of mats, but he raised his head uneasily as the door opened and looked at his wife, not feeling sure how she might act towards him. However, he need not be afraid of harsh words. She merely unbuttoned her armor as fast as possible and bade him to put it on with all speed. Samba obeyed, not daring to ask any questions. When he had finished, the princess told him to follow her, and led him out to the flat roof of the house, below which a crowd had gathered, cheering lustily.
"Samba, the king's son-in-law! Samba, the bravest of the brave! Where is he? Let him show himself!"
And when Samba did show himself, the shouts and applause became louder than ever.
"See how modest he is! He leaves the glory to others!"
cried they, and Samba only smiled and waved his hand and said nothing. Out of all the mass of people assembled there to do the honor to Samba, one alone was there that did not shout and praise with the rest. This was the princess's younger brother, whose sharp eyes had noticed certain things during the fight which recalled his sister much more than they did her husband. Under promise of secrecy, he told his suspicions to the other princes, but not only got laughed at, but was bidden to carry his dreams elsewhere.
"Well, well," answered the boy, "we shall see who is right. But the next time we give battle to the Moors, I will take care to place a private mark on our commander."
In spite of their defeat, not many days after, the Moors sent a fresh body of troops to steal some cattle, and again Samba's wife dressed herself in her husband's armor and rode out at the head of the avenging column. This time the combat was fiercer than before, and in the thick of it her youngest brother drew near and gave his sister a slight wound on the leg. At that moment she paid no heed to the pain, which indeed she scarcely felt. But when the enemy had put to flight and the little band returned to the palace, faintness suddenly overtook her, and she could hardly stagger up the staircase to her own apartments.
"I am wounded,"
she cried, sinking down on the mats where he had been lying.
"But do not be anxious, it has ruined nothing. You have only got the wound yourself slightly in the same spot, and no one will guess that it was I and not you who were fighting."
"What?" cried Samba, his eyes suddenly staring from his head in surprise and fear. "Can you possibly imagine that I should agree to anything so useless and painful? Why, I might as well have gone to fight myself."
"I ought to have known better indeed,"
answered the princess in a voice that seemed to come off a long way off. But quick as thought, the moment Samba turned his back, she pierced one of his bare legs with a spear. He gave out a loud scream and staggered backwards from astonishment, much more than from the pain. But before he could speak, his wife had left the room and had gone to seek the medicine man of the palace.
"My husband has been wounded," said she, when she found him. "Come and tend him with speed, for he has faint loss of blood."
And she took care that more than one person heard her words, so that all the next day the people pressed up to the gate of the palace, asking for news of their champion. "You see," observed the king's eldest son, who had visited the room where Samba lay groaning, "you see, O wise young brother, that we were right and you were wrong about Samba, and that he really did go into battle." But the boy answered nothing, and only shook his head doubtfully. Only 2 days later, the Moors appeared for a third time, and though the herds had been tethered in a new and safer place, they were promptly carried off as before.
For, said the Moor to each other, the tribe will never think of our coming back so soon that they would have beaten us so badly.
When the drums sounded to assemble all the fighting men, the princess rose and sought her husband.
Samba, cried she, my wound is worse than I thought. I can scarcely walk, and could not mount the horse without help. For today I cannot do your work. You must go instead of me.
What nonsense! Exclaimed Samba. I never heard of such a thing. Why, I might be wounded or even killed. You have 3 brothers. The king can choose one of them.
They are all too young, replied his wife. The men would not obey them, but if indeed you will not go, at least you can help me harness the horse.
And to this, Samba, who was always ready to do anything he was asked when there was no danger about it, readily agreed. So the horse was quickly harnessed, and when it was done, the princess said,
I ride the horse to the place of the meeting outside, and I will join you by a shorter way. I will change places with you.
Samba, who loved riding in times of peace, mounted as she had told him, and when he was safe in the saddle, his wife dealt the horse a sharp cut with her whip, and he dashed off through the town and through the ranks of warriors who were awaiting him, and instantly the whole place was in motion. Samba tried to check his steed, but he might as well have sought to stop the wind, and it seemed no more than a few minutes before they were galloping hand in hand with the Moors. Then a miracle happened. Samba the Coward, the skulker, the terrified, no sooner found himself pressed hard, unable to escape, than something sprang to life within him, and he fought with all his might. And when a man of his size and strength begins to fight, he generally fights well. That day the victory was really owing to Samba, and the shouts of the people were louder than ever. When he returned, bearing with him the sword of the Moorish chief, the old king pressed him in his arms and said, "Oh, my son, how can I ever show you how grateful I am for this splendid service?" Samba, who was good and loyal when fear did not possess him, answered straightly, "My father, it is your daughter, not me, whom you should thank for this due, for it is she who turned the cowards away when I was into a brave man. For it was she that turned the coward that I was into a brave man." Yeah. I'm going to have so much fun editing this sometime over the weekend. Let's see, got half an hour left on the timer. How long is this one? Seven pages. Oh, yeah, I do it. So, this one is another Punjabi story. Of course, I'm probably going to mispronounce things. Keep scratching the list. I'm going to get flea ads again. Anyway. Kupti and Imani. There was once a king who had 2 daughters, and their names were Kupti and Imani. He loved them both very much, and spent hours in talking to them. And one day he said to Kupti, the elder, "Are you satisfied to leave your life and fortune in my hands?"
Verily so,
answered the princess,
surprised at the question. In whose hands should I leave them, if not in yours?
But when he asked his younger daughter, Imani, the same question, she replied,
"No, indeed. If I had a chance, I would take my own fortune."
At this answer, the king was very displeased, and said, "You are too young to know the meaning of your words, but be it so, I will give you the chance of gratifying your wish." Then he sent for an old lame fakir who lived in the tumble-down hut on the outskirts of the city, and when he had presented himself, the king said, "No doubt you are very old and nearly crippled. You would be glad of some young person to live with you and to serve you.
So I will send you my youngest daughter. She wants to earn her living, and she can do so with you." Of course, the old fucker had not a word to say, or if he had, he was really too astonished and troubled to say it. But the young princess went off with him smiling, and tripped along quite gaily, whilst he hobbled home with her in a perplexed silence. Directly when they got to the hut, the fucker began to think what he could arrange for the princess's comfort. But after all, he was a fakir, and his house was bare except for one bedstead, 2 old cooking pots, and an earthen jar for water, and one could not get much comfort out of those things. However, the princess soon ended his perplexity by asking,
Have you any money?
"I have pennies somewhere," replied the fakir.
Very well, rejoined the princess. Give me the penny and go out to borrow me a spinning wheel and loom.
After much seeking, the fakir found the penny and started on his errand, whilst the princess went off shopping. First she bought a farthing's worth of oil, and then she bought 3 farthings worth of flax. When she got back with her purchases, she set the old man on the bedstead and rubbed his crippling leg for an hour with the oil. Then she sat down with the spinning wheel and spun all night long while the old man slept, until in the morning she had spun the finest thread that was ever seen. Next she went to the loom and wove until the evening she had woven a beautiful silver cloth.
Now,
She said to the fakir, Fakir, fakir. Now, she said to the fakir,
go into the marketplace and sell my cloth whilst I rest.
"And what am I to ask for it?" said the old man.
2 gold pieces,
replied the princess. So the fakir hobbled away and stood in the marketplace to sell the cloth. Presently the elder princess drove by, and when she saw the cloth she stopped and asked the price. 2 gold pieces, said the fakir, and the princess gladly paid them, after which the old fakir hobbled home with the money, as she had done before Imani did again the day after and day. Always spent a penny of oil and flax, always tended the old man's lame limb, and spun and wove the most beautiful cloth, and sold them to high prices. Gradually the city became famous for her beautiful stuffs, and the old fakir's lame leg became straighter and stronger, and a hole under the floor of the hut where they kept the money became fuller and fuller of gold pieces. At last one day the princess said,
I really think we've got enough to live in greater comfort.
And she sent for the builders, and they built a beautiful house for her and the old fakir. And in the city there was none finer except the king's palace. Presently this reached the ears of the king, and when he inquired whose it was, they told him that it belonged to his daughter. "Whoa!" exclaimed the king. "She said that she would make her own fortune, and somehow or other she seems to have done it." A little while after this, business took the king to another country, and before he went he asked his elder daughter what she would like him to bring her back as a gift.
A necklace of rubies,
answered she. And then the king thought he should like to ask Imani too, so he sent a messenger to find out what sort of present she wanted. The man happened to arrive just when she was trying to disentangle a knot from her loom, and bowing low before her, he said, "The king wishes me to inquire what you wish him to bring you as a present from the country of Dura." But Imani, who was only considering how she should best untie the knot without breaking the thread, replied,
patience,
meaning that the messenger should wait for her while she would be able to attend him. But the messenger went off with this as the answer, and told the king the only thing the Princess Imani wanted was patience. "Oh," said the king, "I don't know whether that thing's to be bought in Dura. I never had it myself, but if it has got to be bought, I will buy it for her." The next day the king departed on his journey, and when his business at Dura was completed, he brought for Kupti a beautiful ruby necklace. Then he said to a servant, "The Princess Imani wants some patience. I did not know there was such a thing. You must go to market and inquire if there's any to be sold, and get it and bring it to me." The servant saluted and left the king's presence. He walked about the market for some time, crying, "Has anyone patience to sell? Patience to sell!" And some of the people mocked, and some, who had no patience, told him to go away and not be a fool. And some said, "The fellow's mad, as though one could buy and sell patience." At length it came to the ears of the king of Dur that there was a madman in the market trying to buy patience. And the king laughed as well and said, "I should like to see this fellow. Bring him here." And immediately his attendants were sent to seek the man, and brought him to the king, who asked, "What is it that you want?" And the man replied, "Sire, I am bidden to ask for patience." "Oh," said the king, "then you must have a strange master. What does he want with it?" "My master wants it as a present for his daughter Imani," replied the servant. "Well," said the king, "I know of some patience which the young lady might have if she cares for it, but it is not to be bought." Now, this king's name was Sabar Khan. Sabar means patience, but the messenger did not know that or understand that he was making a joke. However, he declared that the Princess Imani was not only young and beautiful, but also the cleverest and most industrious and kind-hearted of princesses, and he would have gone on explaining her virtues had not the king laughingly put up his hand and stopped him, saying, "Well, well, wait a minute, and I will see what can be done." With that he got up and went to his own apartments and took out a little casket. Into the casket he put a fan, and shutting it carefully he brought it to the messenger and said, "Here is this casket. It has no lock or key, and yet it will open only to the person who needs its contents, and whoever opens it will obtain patience. But I can't tell whether it will be the kind of patience that is wanted." And the servant bowed low and took the casket, and when he asked what was paid, the king would take nothing. So he went away and gave the casket and an account of his adventures to his master. As soon as their father got back to the country, Kupti and Imani each got their presents which he had bought for them. Imani was very surprised when the casket was brought to her by the hand of the messenger. "But," she said, "what is this? I never asked for anything. Indeed, I had no time, for the messenger ran away before I had unraveled my tangle." But the servant declared that the casket was for her, so she took it with some curiosity and brought it to the old fakir. The old man tried to open it, but in vain. So closely did the lid fit that it seemed to be quite immovable, and yet there was no lock or bolt, nor spring, or anything apparently by which the casket was kept shut. When he tired of trying, he handed the casket to the princess, who hardly touched it before it opened quite easily, and there within lay a beautiful fan. With a cry of surprise and pleasure, Imani took out the fan and began to fan herself. Hardly had she finished 3 strokes of the fan before there was suddenly appeared from nowhere in particular King Sabar Khan of Dur. The princess gasped and rubbed her eyes, and the old fakir sat and gazed in such astonishment that for some minutes he could not speak. At length he said, "Who may you be, fair sir, if you please?" "My name," said the king, "is Sabar Khan of Dur. This lady," bowing to the princess, "has summoned me, and here I am." "I," stammered the princess, "I summoned you? I never saw or heard of you before in my life. How could that be?" Then the king told them how he had heard the man in the city of Dur trying to buy patience, and how he had given him the fan and the casket. "Both are magical," he said. "When anyone uses the fan in 3 strokes of it, I am with them. If they fold it and tap it on the table, in 3 taps I am home again. The casket will not open to all, but you see it was this fair lady who asked for patience, and, as that is my name, here I am, very much at her service." Now the Princess Imani, being of high spirit, was anxious to fold up the fan and give it 3 taps, which would send the king home again. The old fucker was very pleased at his guest, and so in one way or another he spent quite a pleasant evening together before the Sabar Khan took his leave. After that, he was often summoned. Both the fakir and he were very fond of chess, and were good players. They used to sit up half the night playing, and at last a little room in the house began to be called the king's room. And whenever he stayed late, he got to sleep there and go home again in the morning. By and by it came to the ears of the Princess Kupti that there was a rich and handsome young man visiting at her sister's house, and she was very jealous. So she sent one day to pay Imani a visit, and pretended to be very affectionate and interested in the house, and in the way in which Imani and the old fakir lived, and of their mysterious and royal visitor. As the sisters went from place to place, Kupti was shown Sabar Khan's room, and presently, making some excuse, she slipped in there by herself, and swiftly spread under the sheet which lay upon the bed a quantity of finely powdered and splintered glass which was poisoned, and which she had brought with her concealed in her clothes. Shortly afterwards she took leave of her sister, declaring that she could never forgive herself for not having come near her all this time, and that she would now begin to make amends for her neglect. That very evening Sabar Khan came, and sat up late with the old fakir playing the chess as usual. Very tired at the length, bade him and Princess good night, and as soon as he lay down on the bed, thousands of tiny, tiny splinters of poisoned glass ran into him. They could not think what was the matter, and started this way and that until he was pricked all over, and he felt as though he were burning from head to foot. But he never said a word. He only sat up all night in agony of body, and worse agony of mind, to think that he should have been poisoned, as he guessed he was, in Imani's own house. In the morning, although he was nearly fainting, he still said nothing, and by magic of the fan was only duly transported home again. Then he sent for all the physicians and doctors in his kingdom, but none could make out what this illness was, and so lingered on for weeks and weeks of trying every remedy that anyone could devise, and passing sleepless nights and days in pain and fever and misery until at last he was at the point of death. Meanwhile, the Princess Imani and the old fakir were much troubled because, though they waved the magic fan again and again, no Sabar Khan appeared, and they feared that he had tired of them, or that some ill fate had overtaken him. Unless the princess was in such a miserable state of doubt and uncertainty that she determined to go herself to the kingdom of Dur to see what was the matter. Disguising herself in man's clothes as a young fakir, she set out upon her journey alone and on foot, as a fakir should travel. One evening she found herself in a forest, and lay down under a great tree to pass the night, but she could not sleep for thinking of Sabar Khan and wondering what had happened to him. Presently she heard two great monkeys talking to one another in the tree above her head.
"Evening, brother," said one. "Whence come you, and what is the news?" "I come from there," said the other, "and the news is that the king is dying." "Oh," said the first, "I'm sorry to hear that, for he is a master hand at slaying leopards and creatures that might not be allowed to live. What's the matter with him?" "No man knows," replied the second monkey, "but the birds, who see and carry all messages, say that he is dying of poisoned glass that Kupti, the king's daughter, spread upon his bed." "Ah," said the first monkey, "that is sad news. But if they only knew that, and berries in the tree of the berries, that is sad news. But if they only knew that the berries of the very tree we sit in, steeped in hot water, will cure such a disease at days at the most." "True," replied the other. "It is a pity we can't tell some man of medicine so simple and so save a good man's life. But men are so silly. They go and shut themselves in stuffy houses and stuffy cities instead of living in the nice airy trees, and so they miss knowing all the best things."
Now, when Imani heard that Sabar Khan was dying, she began to weep silently. But as she listened, she dried her tears and sat up. As soon as daylight dawned over the forest, she began to gather the berries from the tree until she had filled her cloth with a load of them. Then she walked on as fast as she could, and in 2 days reached the city of Dur. The first thing she did was to pass through the market crying, "Medicine for sale! Any ill that needs medicine!" And presently one man said to his neighbor, "See, there's a young fucker with medicine for sale. Perhaps he could do something for the poor king."
"Ugh," replied the other. "Where so many greybeards have failed, how should a lad like that one be of any use?" "Still," said the first, "he might try."
And he went up and spoke to Imani, and together they set out for the palace and announced that another doctor was come to try to cure the king. After some delay, Imani was admitted to the sick room, and while she was so well disguised the king did not recognize her, he was too wasted by illness that she hardly knew him. But she began at once to fulfill the hope by asking some of the apartments all to herself in a pot in which to boil water. As soon as the water was heated, she steeped some of her berries in it, and gave the mixture to the king's attendants, and told them to wash his body with it. The first washing did such good that the king slept quietly all night. Again, the second day she did the same, and this time the king declared that he was hungry, and called for food. After the third day he was quite well, only very weak from his long illness. On the fourth day he got up and sat upon his throne, and then sent messengers to fetch the physician who had cured him. When Imani appeared, everyone marveled that so young a man should be so clever a doctor, and the king wanted to give him immense presents of money and all kinds of precious things. At first, Imani would take nothing, but at last she said that, if she must be rewarded, she would ask for the king's signet ring and his handkerchief. So, as she would take nothing more, the king gave her his signet ring and his handkerchief, and she departed and travelled back to her own country as fast as she could. A little while after her return, she had related to the fakir all her adventures, and they sent for Sabar Khan by means of the magic fan. And when he appeared, they asked him why he had stayed away for so long. Then he told them all about his illness and how he had been cured. And when he had finished, the princess rose up and, opening a cabinet, brought out the ring and handkerchief, and said, laughing, "Are these the rewards you gave your doctor?" At that the king looked, and he recognized her, and understood in a moment all that had happened, and he jumped up and put the magic fan in his own pocket, and declared that no one should send him away to his own country any more, unless Imani would come with him to be his wife. And so it was settled. And the old fakir and Imani went to the city of Dur, where Imani married the king to live happily ever after. Gotta be careful around those fuckers. But anyway, it's almost time, and ads are gonna be here in less than 8 minutes. Armrock. Oops. Pokemon already escaped. Oh, yeah. Anyway, anyone have any trade suggestions? I'm sure there's a few people on by now. Wow, it was interesting. I just saw someone that was a Corgi avatar. Yes, fuckers are an interesting term to use. And I'm sure YouTube will try to censor me for saying fucker so often. I don't think I've ever seen a female fucker. Would it be a motherfucker? No. This is why this stream is uncensored and often listed as adult stories. Because, well, yeah, terminology is fun.
Excuse me. So, who should we raid? Who's on? Dusk is probably on. No, if anyone has any suggestions, we've got 5 minutes to choose. Remember, cat died. Don't see any of the other storytellers. At least none that are telling stories. Be amazed at how many of them I follow. Dusk is doing art. Oh. Yes. Gotta be careful with those wise old fuckers, though. They can be clever fuckers at times. So, there are the standard red messages. Yep. No typoing easy things. That's the only downside about typing fast, is if I'm not paying attention, I will hit the wrong key. But anyway, thank you all for coming by for Fairy Tales. I think we read, what, 6? Ending with fuckers. Yeah. I will hopefully see you Monday for some modded Baldur's Gate. With crowd control, so you can screw with me as much as you want. Have a good evening, everyone.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist, lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play, the echoes of forgotten tales dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breathes a shiver, its ancient heartbeats thrum. Underneath the silver glow, the wild whispers come. Time to close the book, let the pages fall. You've roamed the winding paths, now heed the twilight.